Welcome to the NIHR Dementia Researcher podcast, brought to you by dementiaresearcher.nihr.ac.uk in association with Alzheimer's Research UK and Alzheimer's Society, supporting early career dementia researchers across the world.
Hello, my name is Dr Fiona McLean and I am a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Dundee, where I investigate how metabolic diseases like obesity and type 2 diabetes can lead to diminished brain function. And I also have a specific focus on the blood-brain barrier. I'm really happy to be hosting this Dementia Researcher episode, where we will be exploring the Royal Society pairing scheme. For those of you not based in the UK, the Royal Society is the world's oldest independent scientific academy, dedicated to promoting excellence in science. Founded in 1660, its former presidents include the likes of Sir Isaac Newton, and its motto is Nullis in Verba, which translated from Latin mean take nobody's word for it. Well, that's enough of the history lesson, because today it has a thoroughly modern outlook, part of which includes supporting and encouraging diversity and early career researchers. This pairing scheme is designed to bring together research scientists and UK parliamentarians, politicians and civil servants. The scientists visit Westminster for a week, where they gain an insight into how science and research can help inform policy making. They are also paired with a parliamentarian, for example, an MP or peer from the House of Lords, or a civil servant, in order to get an understanding of what roles at the forefront of policy and decision making are like. I was fortunate this year to secure a place on the scheme, which ran in person from the 13th to the 18th of March. And today, for this podcast, I'm joined by two other neuroscientists who were also on the scheme. With me is Dr Marzi from the Dementia Research Institute at Imperial College London and Dr Dayne Beccano-Kelly from the Dementia Research Institute at Cardiff University. Hello!
Hey!
Hello!
Nice to be here.
Yeah. So before we dive into what the pairing scheme is all about, let's find out a bit more about you both. So, Dayne, why don't you go first?
Okay. Well, my name's Dayne Beccano-Kelly. I'll drop the doctor part. And I'm a UKRI Future Leader Fellow, so UK Research and Innovations Future Leader Fellowship holder. And with that, I work on Parkinson's disease. Specifically, the area of research that I am in is looking at synaptic dysfunction. So I'm an electrophysiologist and by trade, and so I'm focusing on the early-most changes that we see at the synapse, which is where I think most of the dysfunction is happening. And my team and I are trying to look at multifaceted angles around that particular area. And I've just moved to Cardiff last year, actually. So the lab is just out of the teething phase and we're starting to get rolling now. So it's good.
Nice. That sounds amazing. Are you enjoying Cardiff?
Yeah, it's great. I was actually born here, so it's a bit of a homecoming. So it's nice to be back here, and yeah, it's currently sunny as it always is in Wales, and
just
and
like
actually,
it's always sunny in Scotland, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly the same. It's exactly the same. No rain clouds here. It's always sunshine at the beach, so it's good. But no, yeah, it's lovely to be back.
Thanks so much, Dayne. Sarah, what about you?
So hi, I'm Sarah Marzi and I'm based at Imperial College London, also part of the Dementia Research Institute. I'm an emerging leader, which is sort of a junior group leader position, building my own little group. And our area of research is epigenetics, which means gene regulation. So all the mechanisms in your cells that control which genes are expressed at what point in time, how much of a gene. And these mechanisms are really responsive to environmental cues as well. And so what we're trying to do is understand how these epigenetic mechanisms are involved in translating genetic risk and environmental risk for common neurodegenerative diseases. And so we work specifically on Alzheimer's and on Parkinson's disease, which are caused, both of them, by a combination of genetic factors and environmental factors.
Amazing. I think, do you know what? I know that this is obviously a podcast talking about the Royal Society peering scheme, but this science is so interesting, so maybe we'll have to revisit it. So thank you both so much for your introductions. So yeah, let's dive into what the Royal Society peering scheme was all about, and how it brought us together, 3 neuroscientists. I stumbled across the scheme when I was looking for research funding opportunities, and I ended up on the Royal Society's website, and this opportunity caught my eye, and I'm really interested in how research can shape policy, and I have a personal interest in politics, so the scheme really intrigued me. I think also I'm feeling quite frustrated as a dementia researcher about the amount of funding that's been going into dementia, i.e. how it's not really been enough. So back in 2019, the Conservatives in their manifesto promised to double dementia research funding, and that's never been fulfilled. And in fact, actually, when you really break down the numbers, we can see that there's been a decrease in funding. So I guess I really wanted to find out about how to get my voice as a dementia researcher heard by people who can improve this. So Sarah, how did you find out about the scheme, and what motivated you to apply?
So yeah, I absolutely resonate with what you've just said. So I came across it from an email from the university. So I think each year when they advertise it, they send around a couple of emails, and it sounded really interesting. I have to admit, I wasn't very good at politics before. I didn't really know that much about the different institutions and how government works and makes policy. But like you, I've been more aware of it recently, that it kind of affects us as dementia researchers. Also, as part of Brexit, and how science funding internationally is going to continue in this country. So I think we have to be more aware of it these days. And so I really wanted to learn more about, like you said, how my voice as a scientist can be heard, and how we can bring in scientific evidence and informed opinions as scientists into policy making.
Definitely. And what about yourself, Dane? How did you come across the peering scheme?
Yeah, so much the same. I wanted, like yourself, I wanted to understand how I could influence and change policy. From my perspective, I've been working on certain aspects of equality and equity, diversity and inclusiveness in STEM, in science and research. And so I really wanted to know and understand more about how scientific policy is generated, and how I could influence that, and how I could try and make a real change. And it just interested me. And so I was discussing that with an old friend of mine who actually works for the Government Office of Science, and he pointed me in the direction of this particular scheme, for which I then applied and successfully got through. So it was through my previous work and the desire to do it, and some connections and signposting. So it was good.
Yeah, that's good. I think the one thing that all 3 of us sort of have in common is that we were all kind of motivated, that we wanted to be able to influence, be able to find out how we can help support our areas of research. And I think that's quite interesting. It's quite a good place to come from, that motivation, because it makes you want to go out and talk to people when you're on this scheme. So now that we know why everyone wanted to apply, we should probably outline what we all got up to during the week. So we arrived on the Sunday. I think we did a competition when we were there amongst everybody of who'd travelled the furthest, and I thought I'd won it from Dundee.
You thought you'd got it until somebody said they'd come from Italy that day.
Yeah, and I was like, no, that's definitely further. So yeah, we arrived on the Sunday, and we had a really nice introductory dinner when we got there, and we got to meet all the other researchers that were on the scheme and the organisers as well. And that's actually how we sort of realised that there was 3 dementia researchers on the scheme, which I thought was really cool, because it kind of meant that when we went and met the people from government, we could sort of have that sort of voice, that one voice on what we wanted to say about supporting dementia research. So there were about 30 of us in total, I think. Would you agree? About 30. And although we were all from neuroscience backgrounds, everyone else was from really broad backgrounds, and all across different UK institutes. So there was engineers, marine biologists. I'm trying to think who else there was. There was loads of people. Psychologists.
Social scientists as well.
Social sciences. So I guess, to anyone listening to the podcast, if you feel that maybe you're from quite a broad discipline or whatever, like you should still apply for it if you're interested in policy. So that was really a wonderful experience, sort of be at the Royal Society, meet the people who run it and represent it. And then that evening, we then went to Westminster, and we had a parliamentary reception in the Palace of Westminster. And we heard from MP Chionwara, who is the Shadow Minister for Science, Research and Innovation. We also heard from Baroness Brown of Cambridge, who chairs the Lords Science and Technology Committee. And we also heard from Dr. Julie Maxton, who's the Executive Director of the Royal Society. And the reception was also attended by societies and charities, including CARA, which stands for the Council for At-Risk Academics, who are an amazing, fantastic charity who support academics in immediate danger or in exile. And they assist them and try to continue their work in safety. And they were there, as well as the Royal Society of Edinburgh and the Physiological Society and a few other people as well. So who did you both talk to at the reception, and did you think it was a good networking opportunity?
I talked to Che, and she was absolutely fantastic orator. She got across well. It was sad to not have George Freeman there. It would have been very good. Current Minister for Science. Yeah. And it would have been good to have him at the event based on scientists attending the Royal Society and integrating. His absence was obviously noted and missed, but it was Chi was fantastic.
She's I like her. She knows what she's talking about, and I think for scientists sometimes you get a bit worried about the representation of science in government, but when you see people like her sort of, you know, being the shadow Minister for Science, representing and her views, and the way I actually thought, because I think all three of us spoke to her at sort of one point relatively sort of at the same time, and you felt like she was really listening about the sort of support that we need for dementia research and how important it is as an issue that there is this sort of lack of funding.
Well, going back to that ECR, how much the Royal Society are pushing the ECR, funding. It was that was what I brought up with her about how we really are one of the only, well, we're a country that doesn't have a tenure track system, and it doesn't have a lot of routes to success that are firmly ingrained with the higher education institutions to allow ECRs to have that route and course upwards, and that we really need more of them. I mean, the UKRI FLF, the Future Leader Fellowship, is one, but it's like the only one, and it's coming to an end, and it's so yes, exactly, yeah. And so it's one of those things that there needs to be more of them, and money needs to. Otherwise, we're going to end up with a brain drain. Everybody moving to places where they can get significantly, tenured places, and we need more of that. So,
and that's been sort of made a sort of worse situation by Brexit as well.
Oh yeah, it's been you don't magnified, isn't it? So,
yeah, it's been magnified. So yeah. I think that's a great topic to bring up.
She was really receptive to that, and I think she was. I mean, she was wanting to know why that is, and like what are the barriers, and so it was a good 5-minute chat. So it was nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, one thing to point out is if you hadn't been on this scheme, you would never be able to have that level of conversation with the minister, or the Shadow Minister for Science. So that's one thing that the Royal Society scheme just allows you to do, that you kind of, that's the type of opportunity that's really hard to get. But it's great to hear that she's receptive and listening. Sarah, what about you?
Couldn't agree more. I think we were all fangirling a little bit over and I think for me it's the combination. So she's an engineer by background, so she clearly has solid understanding of science and takes that really seriously. She also isn't afraid to speak opinions. She's not too political in the way she expresses things, which I like and I find refreshing. And like you said, she really engages with people and listens actively and reacts to what people say to her. That is quite clear. And in fact, I got really lucky because my original pair, who was a civil servant, kind of dropped me at the last minute because he was on holiday. So I just kind of snuck my way in and asked Chi what she was going to be doing, and managed to shadow her for a day on Wednesday. Again, because she was so receptive about it, she said, drop me an email and And I thought, well, who knows? I bet she gets thousands of emails every day. But she got back to me, and she actively engaged with me, let me follow her around for a day, and it was the best experience ever.
I think that's really great that an MP has actually engaged with a scientist that well.
It was amazing. I think that's an amazing coup. You must have, yeah.
And at such last minute as well. And she's I mean, you can imagine as a shadow frontbench minister, she is such a busy person, and yet she still thought it was important to take the time to engage with scientists and to support the scheme. So yeah, that was really impressive.
That's really good. We'll come on to the shadowing days in a little while. So, reception, really worthwhile going to by the sounds of it, and just fantastic. On day 2, we started with the tour of the Parliament. I thought this was really cool. Maybe this is a bit, I mean, I'm already a bit geeky because I'm a scientist, but this is the politics geekiness coming out as well. But going into the House of Commons, so you get to go in and see the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and it's kind of surreal because the only time I've seen that before is on the TV during, the news or PMQs. And it's weird because it's like being on the TV set of a show you watch because it's so familiar, but you're there and you've never been there before. So yeah, what did you first think of sort of that tour in the morning?
I thought it was fantastic. It was, to be fair, it was my third time in.
I was going to say, I thought Sarah had been there before. Yeah.
I'm also based in London and have been for the past 9 years. So yeah, and I had a friend who worked in the House of Lords. So, but still, it still is kind of awe-inspiring every time you are there, and because you have that association with the TV, and also it is a really impressive palace and building. Like it's quite overwhelming, right? And so historical, so old, some parts of it, so beautiful, and so much pomp almost.
Yeah, a lot of history. A lot of history.
That's the bit I liked. I don't think we're amongst friends here, so we're all geeking out. It was really amazing, right? So it was, sorry.
I think so this wasn't on the tour, but Chris Law, who I was paired with, as I mentioned before, he took me into the chapel of St Mary Undercroft. I don't know if either of you two went in. So I think you have to be taken in there with someone. You can't it's not open to the public basically. And the chapel is beautiful. Absolutely, it's absolutely stunning. And I think it was built in, I've got it in my notes, it was built in 1365, so it's really old. But my favourite bit wasn't the actual chapel itself. It's actually a cupboard in the chapel, and in this cupboard there's now a plaque, and it's to the suffragette Emily Wilding Davidson, and she actually hid herself in that cupboard in the chapel on the evening of the 1911 census. And she did that so that she would be registered as being in the Palace of Westminster on the census. And she did this because it was a big deal, because women weren't allowed to vote then, let alone be members of Parliament and in the Palace of Westminster. So I thought it was I was standing in this cupboard and I was like, I was just like, this is cool.
It is. It's all these little bits but it's these little bits that are making up, the history of the whole thing, and they're all important, and that's really awesome. There was
I just thought it was really cool.
They chained themselves to the statues in the old, not Commons, but the old Parliamentary room where everything had been laid out like a church, effectively. And has started with all of the debates happening across the table, across the walkway, was because everything had been set up like a church. But then somebody had suffragettes movement had chained themselves up, and they'd have had to break off one of the spurs off of one of the boots of where they'd changed themselves to on the statue, and it's just remained like that because it's part of history, and I quite like that sort of solidity of something's been physically changed, and we're just going to keep it like that because we need to remember it. And it was really cool.
It is really cool. Yeah, I love the history of that. The rest of day 2 and day 3 were when we were paired up with the people that we were shadowing. So who were you both paired up with? We talked about Sarah's a little bit, but who were you both paired up with, and what did you learn from them? So Dane, who were you paired up with?
So I was paired up with Alan Cairns, who is MP for the Vale of Glamorgan, so my local MP actually. It was lovely to be chatting with both my local MP and somebody who I think is held in high regard within his party, and so he took me to his office and we sat down and talked about the scheme itself, what I hoped to gain from it, what my work was. And he seemed genuinely interested. He wanted to know and understand exactly how to link in, and actually gave me large swaths of advice as to how to actually make changes and trying to implement them here in Wales. And it was really nice. It was good to be engaged with and to have a good old chat. And I sort of met him both on that Tuesday and the Wednesday as well, on two separate occasions. On the Tuesday we had a good old chat, and actually he made a point to point out of his window we could hear music blasting, and apparently one of his constituents had made a point to continually protest over a series of days by playing music as loud as he possibly could on certain days where he knew Alan would be in there. I think in particular it was Brexit and the move for us to leave Europe. But there may have been a number of policies that he wasn't agreeing with.
And what music was he playing?
A whole host of, some of them were pretty good tunes, but a host of Chumbawamba was in there at one point. But it was stuff that was aimed to stop Alan from engaging, focusing, thinking, which it could it was having a success, I think, on one day, because he was actually trying to write his speech, his talk for the general questions that were that day, the general debate, of which they were talking about a general debate for the Ukraine. And I went to witness that, and it was really interesting as to see how they set themselves up for that. So he had been told that he might have a certain period of time to give his address and to say his piece, but he didn't know how long that period of time would be until probably about 20 minutes before. And so he'd written it out and then had said he was going to take out large chunks of it if it had been 3 minutes, which he thought it was going to be, but then it ended up being 8 minutes. And so he was like, this is an 11-minute speech, so I'll take this bit out and this bit out, and then I'll go in and execute it. And it was just I don't know about you guys, when I'm giving a talk, I usually like to know what I'm going to be saying, not literally 2 seconds before. I like to know what I'm going to be doing before I go into it. So to watch him sort of be like, all right, to get my main points across about how we should be supporting people coming from the Ukraine and granting them asylum and what we can be doing to do that, he just chopped and changed that on the fly, and he still came across incredibly well, which was really, really good. He was another significant orator. It was rare. It was very impressive. So yeah,
I think that's something that we don't appreciate all the time, is how fast-moving politics is, and how adaptable the people who are, whether they're MPs or also their assistants, the people who help them, have to be. Yes, they have to be
definitely
really on it.
Yeah. And so it was really. It was engaging. It was nice to be there, and then obviously his staff will also put me in contact, the agenda for the next day, which included the select committee, which we'll talk about in a moment, I think. So, but that was great to be part of that. And
so it sounds like you got a lot out of that.
I think so, yeah. So I came away thinking, like I said, he gave some advice as to how to engage MPs here in Wales, and how best to do that, what the right approaches would be to really get changes going, and having a steady contact with individuals that could really make a change. And I think that was actually, you could just be like, well, I'll just go in and say it. Even if you started to understand how the politics worked, which I'm with Sarah, I was I understood, but then there were sections of it that I didn't really understand. Select committees, again, as we're going to come on to in a moment, was something that wasn't wholly on my radar. I knew their purpose, but I didn't realize their influence and how that cross-party section of it really was quite a unique benefit to having that. But it was really interesting having him tell me exactly how to execute it in much more real terms, I suppose, of how to make a change and engage with policy and
that's interesting. I had quite a lot of similar conversations with Chris Law As I mentioned before, he's my local MP, and the one thing that he gave good advice on is if you're going to email your MP, email them directly and personally, like as in personally from you, because I think there's quite a lot of petitions go around where it's, ask your MP to take part in this debate or ask your MP to sign this petition, and it's on an automatic response, sort of click button, and it's an automatic message. So they get a lot of those in. So because they're all the same, if you've even added anything on sort of at the end that's, unique to what you want to say, it probably will get lost. Whereas if you sit down and write from your own email address what you want to say and say why you're passionate about it, they're a lot more likely to engage. So I think that's actually really important for a lot of dementia researchers and scientists who are listening to this podcast, because I think a lot of time we do get these sort of messages from sometimes the charities that we work closely with to sign petitions, or ask our MPs to sign petitions or support something, and actually just taking that 5 minutes to send the email yourself in your own words probably will have a lot more influence than just clicking the button. And that's something that I really took away from it, is like, right, I'm actually, if I'm going to take part in those things and support those things, I'll probably just write it myself. And I was quite fortunate in some ways. So Chris was away on the first day doing some of the humanitarian work that he does alongside, like sort of as part of his role as an MP. And so I had the chance to speak to another SNP MP, Carol Monaghan, who she is a Glasgow MP, but she also chairs the Science and Technology Committee meeting on diversity and inclusion in STEM. And we had some really good conversations about women in STEM and the barriers that they face, and about ECRs as well, early career researchers. And it was really great to talk to her, and it was really nice to meet someone who'd been in science and then moved into politics. So she did a physics degree and then became a physics teacher and then became an MP. And I think she almost covers all the bases in a way, because she's kind of done the science, but she's also done the education side of science, and now she's in politics. And she was very interesting to talk to. And then, like I was mentioning before, Chris was really interesting to talk to as well. And it was lovely to get sort of one-on-one chats with him, not only as sort of a scientist trying to learn about policy, but also as his constituent, and talk about Dundee and the university and how important science is to the community that I live in. So back to Sarah. So you were, as you mentioned before, you lost your pairing.
Yes,
They
I'm not
wander.
100%, but essentially for the days that we were in Parliament, I lost my pairing. So I was supposed to be working with a civil servant from the Office for Life Sciences, which is actually a really, really interesting office and a really interesting place to engage for us scientists within the government, I think.
What do they do? Just an overview, sort of,
so they're
people listening.
responsible for implementing kind of life science related innovation and bringing together industry and research with a somewhat commercial outlook as well, like spin-offs, startups, new things, but also funding new scientific initiatives and things. So, and they sort of hybridly fall under the under BASE, so the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and half under health and social care. So they really have this strong healthcare implementation focus on their life sciences as well. And I've since spoken to some people there, and I do think they do really interesting work, and they come up with these new initiatives, and they talk to stakeholders, mainly from industry, I've found. So I think this is a place where they should be talking more to us scientists, and we scientists should be engaging more with them, because I think we have a lot to say about recommendations of where this funding should go or how we can make things work better.
So so there's a lack of academic input, is what you're saying.
That was generally my impression, that when politicians want to engage with scientific questions, they would first turn to industry and not to academia, really. I just think it's a matter of what habits and defaults, right? Because I think industry probably more proactively engages with government, and so they built up networks and contacts, and that's then the default thing for them to go choice too. So something like the Royal Society pairing scheme, again, I think comes in really usefully here because it starts to build up some of those connection between academics and politicians as well.
Absolutely. That's such a good point. It's a two-way street. So we need to engage more with government so that they feel more comfortable or know the routes to engaging with us as academics as well in academic institutes. And I think that's a challenge. I think it's a challenge for us, and I think it's a challenge for them. But if they as the government think that they've already got the routes that they're happy with, I think it's down to us to show that actually no, you're missing out.
You are, yeah, and that there are alternative routes, yeah, and so we do need to do that. I think that's entirely right. You're right.
If I may, on that note, so because I talked about the Office for Life Sciences, but then actually what happened is I spoke to Chi Onwara, our Shadow Minister for Science, on Monday, and she had me follow her around all of Wednesday, basically. And my first impression is how many different topics and things can one person cover in a single day? And going kind of along the lines of what Dayne was saying before, like no prep, jumping right into this, from this reception to that panel to an ITV interview, recorded a full interview in like 5 to 10 minutes, sounds really eloquent and has good opinions on everything, but and there are no redos. She just does it, and it's right there on it, and switching between topics all the time. And because she hadn't obviously planned to have me come along, because I wasn't her official pair or anything. In fact, I was lucky because she's the MP for Newcastle and would have preferred, I think, someone from her own constituency. I think partially made up for it by being from Imperial College, which is her own alma mater.
That's good. That's good.
But yeah, so basically all of our chats were sort of the 5 minutes walking from here to there, and we talk about some of my science and some of her policy making. So it was, you have to be so switched on and really good at multitasking and jumping between different topics and things. So really, really impressive. And one of the panels that she participated in was really about making politicians more science savvy and bringing more science knowledge into politics so that policy decisions can be made on a better informed basis.
I think that's interesting. I think this is something that actually has been sort of highlighted by the pandemic, is how we need sort of better representation of scientists and science across a really broad range of topics in government. And I think it's interesting because we obviously at the moment are hearing this phrase science superpower a lot in the media, and I don't think we're really seeing how that's happening. But one of the things I did think was interesting was hearing about the number of scientists they're actually employing in the government, for example in the Office for Science, and it's doubled. I think they've doubled the number of scientists that they're employing.
They're actively trying to push for it, yeah. So go science, yeah.
So now we've mentioned a few times about what select committees are. So let's actually delve into that and let everyone listening know what a select committee is, because I'll be honest, I'd kind of heard the term, but I didn't really know what it was and what it was aiming to do until I went on this pairing scheme. So both Dayne and I attended the Science and Technology Select Committee, which was meeting to discuss diversity and inclusion in STEM. So first of all, let's explain what a select committee is and why they are important. So Dayne, do you want to go for a description?
Can start us off, and if I miss anything, you're going to.
Yeah.
It's first of all, it's a selection of MPs from all the parliamentary groups. So it's a cross council thing. It's across parliamentary groups, across party setup, and that for a start that did stun me. But I don't know why. I knew that they existed like that, but I suppose I thought maybe there was supposed to be more political infighting when we actually saw it operating. But actually, by the by, so what we have there is a committee that is set there to investigate or look into and learn more about a specific point or area of society. And so the one that we were looking at and we were present for was equality, diversity, and inclusion in STEM, in technology and research and in science. And what they'll do is that they have a particular ideal and that they're trying to look at and investigate in more detail. And what they've done is that they'll invite witnesses who will have been allowed to freely submit, in some cases, testimony and information on the subject matter, being experts in that particular area. Sometimes those individuals will have been summoned, isn't quite the right word because it's not court, but it will have been asked to attend and to give their testimony and submit the information. And so what they will do is gather this information from expert witnesses, expert opinions, in order to come to a conclusion of how policy may be shifted, altered, changed, designed in order to change what was wrong with that particular area being investigated. And I think ours was in particularly important to, I think, the three of us here, and I think to the wider scientific community at large. But it was an interesting meeting, I think, to say the least. I don't know if I've missed something there.
Yeah.
Fiona.
So it was kind of split into two sessions, wasn't it? So the first session was two witnesses who were looking at inclusion and diversity at sort of a high school level, or even actually just a school level. So looking at what is it that makes certain groups in society step back from doing science degrees and studying them. And they were trying to find out what the reasons were and how they could actually address them or change that by implementing policies through government. And then the second half of it was looking at, it was kind of more funding focused. So looking at funding and, again, why certain groups are underrepresented, whether that be in securing funding or also sitting on the boards that make funding decisions. So those were two people, I think they were both professors at universities, yeah. And the evidence was, I mean, we were just quite like, whoa, like it was interesting to see in a select committee in that style, basically the issues from being 5 years old all the way up to our career stages now. It was like, oh my goodness, like there's so many barriers to women and there's so many barriers to ethnic minorities and disabilities and anyone who just doesn't fit that norm that has come before.
Effectively, all the underrepresented groups that are within our STEM community, there are barriers that are preventing an increase in those particular underrepresented groups. So it was just perpetuated, and it was really bad.
So we've kind of been talking about sort of diversity inclusion itself, but to bring it back to select committee, just to sort of explain that. So basically it's set up and witnesses come in and they give oral evidence, but before that you can go online. Actually, do you know what, anyone can go online and do this, and this is something that I'm going to keep an eye on now, because I realise that you can actually have influence and on these select committees as a scientist from sitting at home. So basically you can go online and you can look on the UK Parliament website, and under committees there's a section of find an inquiry, and you can type in a search word and it'll bring up anything that has that word in it that you're interested in, and you can submit written evidence. And they said if you do this, then the best thing to do is be succinct and to the point, because if it goes on and on, they're not going to use it. But I think it said about 350 words is usually what's appropriate. And yeah, you can give your own evidence. So any of us could have given evidence at the beginning of the inclusion and diversity inquiry, and you might be asked up to come in as a witness.
This was something
from that.
Fiona, I don't know about you, this was something I just didn't really know. I thought that you would be selected and called up. I thought the second half of what we were describing it as earlier was the thing. They would ask professors, as they did, to come in, and that was basically about it. It was experts as they had deemed them, I suppose, is what I thought was. But it was amazing that you can actually influence. I think this is a fantastic thing. This is something, one of the huge take-homes that I took from this was you can influence it in this manner. If you do feel strongly about something, you're right. You be succinct. Don't just prattle on about your own personal opinions, but but
But
base
they
them in
sometimes
fact.
do want to hear, yeah.
They do want to hear
based on
that.
fact. They
Base
sometimes
some
do want
facts.
to
Yeah.
hear personal.
No, I agree,
experiences
but
as well.
it was I was awed to know that I could influence policy in that way. Is the EDI one actually closed now? Because they're going to be calling
that
for
one for written evidence is because it's moved on to. We saw it move on to the.
They've moved on to
select committee.
the UKRI is going to be called to give evidence now. I think though.
What I was going to point out, if like me, upon hearing Dayne and Fiona talk about this amazing equality and diversity session in the select committee, which I missed, you would like to hear more about it, they actually record all of these things online.
They
You can
do.
literally watch the whole thing online, and you can see Dayne sitting behind.
Yeah, we were caught on shot, Fiona. We were sat there, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, we're gonna have to lean out."
I went and rewatched some of this because it sounded like such an amazing and such an important session for us scientists.
And that's a really good point to make. So they save a lot of in fact, all of their official reporting goes on to Hansard. And that's, like I say, the official report of all parliamentary debates and committees. And you can, I think it goes back like hundreds of years. And they keep it up to date. So we will be able to see whatever happened today. Tomorrow it should be online. And just one point I'd like to make on what you're saying about being involved in select committees and giving written or oral evidence if you're asked to come forward. We talk about impact a lot in science. We talk about how can we make impact with the work that we're doing in the lab, and we focus a lot on papers, obviously, so impact within our scientific communities. And I think we're getting a lot better at the impact we can make through public engagement. I think that's definitely picked up. What I don't think has been promoted or pushed much is impact through policy. It kind of gets mentioned a bit, but nobody really explains how you can make that impact. And this is a really good way to do that. You can go online, you can submit your evidence if it's in your area of research, whether that's dementia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, whether that's something to do with research environments, academia, funding. You can give your opinion and influence, because they said they will read every single bit of written evidence that gets submitted. They read. Someone reads it.
Yeah. And I thought it's amazing. It's fantastic to know that you can do that.
Yeah,
and influence.
Absolutely.
Get out there and do it.
Yeah, everyone listening, go online, have a look at this.
Yeah.
It's so great that we can actually engage in this way. So now we've talked about select committees, and the other thing I'd just like to mention before we move on from that is that the UK Parliament Outreach and Engagement Service, they actually work in partnership with committees to identify ways which you can become more involved with select committees. So they might be a place to go to if you think, I want to do this, I'm not sure how I do this. They're probably the people to contact. So we've talked about the shadowing, the whole experience of being there. And just to wrap up now, let's ask a couple of questions on what was something that you learned during the week that surprised you the most. So what was something that you sort of think, oh, I didn't expect to learn? Apart from, obviously, I think the select committees for me was surprising. I was like, oh, I can actually do that. Yeah. I'll start then. One of the things I thought was really interesting was obviously talking to the MPs was really great. I really enjoyed talking to the people who assist them. So because I feel like you find out a bit more about the reality and what goes on from those people. And Chrissy's employee, Paul, who assists him in his office, was just fantastic. I spoke to him a lot on Wednesday alongside speaking to Carol, and I can't remember her name, but also Carol's person who assists her as well. She was lovely and fantastic, and it was interesting because she wasn't actually sort of she didn't come through the SNP party. I think it was more she was just interested in politics and found the position. And I think that's interesting to know that maybe not everyone who's working within a party is actually sort of stuck to that party. They might have more sort of cross-party views. I think that's really interesting to learn about. And also, one of my favourite questions to ask the MPs and the people that they worked with was, who's your favourite MP that is not in the party that you are? I loved asking that question because it made them stop and think. And they were like, well, actually, I quite like working with this person from the Conservatives, or this person from the DUP, or there's this Lib Dem person I like working with. It was just really interesting. And I think that's something really important to highlight, is that there is a lot of cross-party work,
interaction,
interaction that goes on, and that's a really important thing, because when you have parties that are as big as the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, not everyone within that party is going to have the same view, and I think it's important to realise that, you know, they are people themselves, and they also are not just representing their party, but they're also having to represent their constituents, and they're going to have the voice in their own head that has their own opinions when they're making decisions. So it is a hard job, I think, to be an MP and to sort of decide how you're going to support something, or if you're going to support it at all. Sarah, what did you walk away from and think, oh gosh?
So I think I was really overwhelmed, impressed by the size, quality, and efficiency of the civil service, public service kind of aspect of government. And this includes things like select committees and other mechanisms through which policy making is driven. And so when, for example, Dayne says something like they read all the written evidence, that's not the MPs that read all the written evidence. There will be some public or civil servants that really go through this, that have really in-depth knowledge of those things, and that then distill down and drive a lot of the writing of the outcome materials and reports of that as well. And I didn't realize, how big this is, how much influence this has. What we get as normal consumers of politics is, I think, a very distilled version that some cabinet minister says at the end of the day to the TV. And we were not even aware of all the process and input and evidence that goes into then making a final decision on whatever policy it is. And I was, really impressed by the quality of that. On the last day, we learned a bit about what happens in crisis situations, for example, like say you have a new pandemic, or say you have some problems with your vaccines that have side effects. What do you even do as a government? And there are so many efficient processes in place where they gather experts, where they evaluate what to do. I was utterly impressed by that.
I think just to touch on that briefly as well, I think from COVID and pandemic, there's going to be a lot of select committees and a lot of discussion around how we deal with the next huge challenge. And I think it's interesting because I think when we were there already, they were saying we need to broaden out the places that we find our experts, their backgrounds, where they're from, geographically, as well as these individuals' own backgrounds as well. So, you know, sort of going back to that sort of diversity and inclusion, that's really, really important, as well as within scientific topics themselves, because I think they fully admit themselves that they were prepared for a flu pandemic. They were not really prepared for anything else. And I think that's been a tough lesson that they've learned, but hopefully it is a lesson that they've learned, and they're going to really broaden out where they gather their information from as part of that. So yeah. Dayne, what did you sort of?
I think we've covered a lot of the main select committee, like I said, and the influence that you can have there. I thought it was fascinating, although I guess it makes sense, but understanding the fact that people had to didn't just toe the party line. They had to think about what was important for their constituents, but also themselves. And I suppose it just came to the fore more when we were there and experiencing things like the PMQs or some of the debates or the select committees. It just made it a bit more, I understand that you're having to have several hats on at any given moment, and that actually, you know, there'll be some times where you're just like, well, no, I can't be voting on this and this policy in this way because it doesn't sit right with X, Y, and Z. And I just thought that was interesting. I think one of the last day, as Sarah was sort of alluding to, was really interesting, where we had a deputy director of Go and influence from people on DEFRA, etc., and how we as scientists can have another role in perhaps in addition to the ones that we have in academia, specifically another job role where you can go and be scientific advisors, be employed as a scientific advisor, which I thought you might have to do as a sort of a full-time thing.
Yeah.
But actually, you
But
can
they talked
apply
about
for that.
secondments a
They
lot,
talked about
didn't they?
secondments, and this was something that actually caught my eye, and I was very intrigued by this prospect.
So just to wrap up then, why would you both recommend the Royal Society Peering Scheme?
For me, it's just been a huge learning experience about all the ways in which policy is made, in which government responds to various different scenarios, in which I, as a scientist, can get involved in things like select committees, providing evidence, how transparent a lot of this is. Like there are other instruments that the government uses, like all-party parliamentary groups, for example, that are open to the public. And I was just quite impressed by how much you can get involved in and interact with if you want to, and if you make an effort.
Absolutely. Dayne?
I 100% agree. I think it was the learning curve. I think it was, no matter how much you think you understand the politics and how we ought to interact, I think there was something to be learned by everybody. I think everybody here learned something, and we've all said something that we've learned today. And I think it was just, I think I would recommend it because I think it's important for us to be interacting, as I mentioned just before, and I think it's an inspiring way to learn how to do that. And so for that reason, I think next year's crop will come away with the same sets of feelings. I think that you'll come away thinking, well, how can I do it? Or you'll go in there saying, how can I do it? And you'll come away with actual active ways of executing and influencing policy and politics. So it was great. It was nice to be able to see a real route to being able to change something that affects both our local community in the science realm and the world at large. It was nice. Great.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think it was a hugely empowering experience, especially for people at our career stage. I think it just showed how you can, that route to how you can influence policy, and how to connect with policy development. And I'm going to say it, I found it really fun. It was fun talking to people who do something totally different. It was just really amazing to see, like I say, what the Royal Society do. They were just fantastic and just really intriguing and, like I say, empowering to see how, as individuals, we can influence policy in government. And if anyone listening thinks that they would like to apply to the Royal Society Peering Scheme for next year, the best thing to do is to keep an eye on their website, which is royalsociety.org. I think for us the deadline was in October, so just keep an eye before then. So maybe August, September, keep an eye. And a top tip for having a successful application is to make sure that you have a really clear lay explanation of your science. So that was a really important part of the application form. And this is because not everyone who reads it will be from a science background. And also make sure to explain how exciting your work is, because I think for them, they really want people who are excited about the research they do and who want to talk about it to them. So make sure you hype your research up. So I'm just going to end this podcast now by saying thank you so much to Sarah and Dayne for joining me today. We have profiles on all our guests on the website, which includes details of their Twitter accounts. So if you have any questions or just want to reach out and say hello, then drop us a line. Thank you for listening, and please don't forget you will find lots of support for early career researchers, event listings and blogs on the same topic from a regular contributor, Dr Clarissa Gleibel, on the Dementia Researcher website.
Brought to you by dementiaresearcher.nihr.ac.uk in association with Alzheimer's Research UK and Alzheimer's Society, supporting early career dementia researchers across the world.